you remember wide receiver Fred Barnett. He joins us now on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Fred, it's Mike and Pete here in Atlantic City. How you been, pal?
Hey, guys, what's happening? I've been good.
Well, it's good to catch up with you on these terms. Unfortunate, but sometimes I said earlier things like this. I think Buddy was a guy that we as fans and media guys had a great time. That era was great. You playing for him, it's a time to celebrate what he meant to you as a professional, athlete. What he meant to you as jumping into the NFL, which is something that is tough enough to do. What was playing for Buddy like as a young man?
It was very interesting. It seems like I was just kind of thrown in the fire, and Buddy was a Super Bowl coach, and came to the Philadelphia Eagles and kind of was established as a defensive guru, and then for him to be instrumental in drafting me as a offensive player. First of all, I was honored, and I didn't really get it until I was there for a few years, in Philadelphia for a few years, and really kind of understood what he stood for. And it was an honor just to play for him. He was, in my opinion, and I know a lot of other guys feel the same way, he was a player's coach. And if I'm not mistaken, I think he was probably one of the coaches who kind of invented that term, a player's coach. He stood for us. And he was the type of guy. He was the type of coach who would look you in the eye if you if you didn't add up to nothing. He would tell you, hey, you're not good for this team. And if you did, at the same time, he would tell you, you're somebody that we could use. So he was a very honest guy. He was a great coach, a defensive guru, and he was, in a nutshell, a player's coach.
Yeah, and, you mentioned the term player's coach. You were an offensive player, and I think the perception outside was that, he didn't care about the offensive guys as much. Was that something that you felt, or was that not true? I mean, was Buddy as fair to the offensive guys as he was to the defensive guys?
I think he was fair. Of course, he wanted us to be successful. We were on the same team. I don't mean to be obvious, but he didn't do as much with the offense as he did with the defense. Of course, him being a very defensive-minded coach, he allowed the offensive coordinators and the offensive guys to do exactly what needed to be done to be successful. I think it's unfortunate in his time here when we had some of the best defenses in the league that we didn't put up really enough points to even, get to the playoffs or even possibly win a Super Bowl. So, I feel that, he was definitely involved in the offense, but more so defensively, and he allowed, the offensive coaches to really carry most of the day had.
We're talking with Fred Barnett, one of the receivers on one of the Eagles' longest plays of all time, a 95-yard touchdown pass from Randall Cunningham. That came in a 1990 game against the Buffalo Bills, and we're visiting with him about Buddy Ryan. A lot of the stories today, Fred, have been about Buddy's relationship or lack thereof with the ownership. What were some of the things that you saw, or how did you know, like, he had your back and wasn't necessarily endeared with Mr. Bremen?
Well, there are times when he, complained about not being in touch with Mr. Bremen, and and no disrespect to Mr. Bremen, he had a life, but he also had a football team. So, and to some degree, I think he just really wanted Buddy and whoever he had as a head coach and offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators to run the team. So, I think it really kind of came to, I guess, a crossroads when there was time to do contracts, and Buddy was invested in certain players, and the organization, of course, was making business transactions or business decisions, and I think that's when it really kind of came to a head, or when Buddy started to kind of speak out against ownership, when really ownership wasn't there for the day to day. And seeing the guys, progress, and seeing what the guys were going through, and he was at a point of knowing who was good enough for the team and who wasn't good enough. So, you always have your ups and downs in organizations, but at the same time too, it's a very positive thing when you can when you have a perspective and when you can stand for exactly who you are and you're successful at it. You know, Buddy he's a Super Bowl coach. You know, so that's something that you can't take away from him. And you know, when you talk to all the players that have played for him, there's nothing negative anyone I think can even say about him. So, you know, he was a positive reinforcement in a lot of players' lives.
How did it go over in the locker room when he was let go? Because his famous quote, of course, was, "I've never been fired for winning."
Yeah, well, it was tough. It was tough. I mean, you know, having guys like Reggie White, you know, having guys that you know, I feel like to a degree I was kind of adopted into the Buddy Ryan era because, you know, before that, the 2 years before that, he had guys like Cunningham. He has, you know, Reggie White, Jerome Brown, Clyde Simmons, you know, Seth, those guys who I consider, you know, like sons to him, you know, just kind of pull me in as an offensive player, you know, to be a part of what they were trying to achieve. So to some degree, I just kind of felt very, very fortunate to be, you know, be a part of a legacy here that's in Philadelphia. But he what a great coach he was. And, you know, as I mentioned, you know, when you talk to some of the players and some of the guys, I actually talked to Seth this morning, and Seth he visited him, you know, of course, before, I think it was last week, he said he visited him, and of course he wasn't doing well, and of course I heard the news this morning. But, you know, here's the guy, you know, and even other guys, even about the guys from the Bears as well. You know, guys constantly going down the floor just to visit him, and it really lets you know the positive, you know, influence that he had on, you know, these young guys coming into the NFL that he kind of grew with over their careers.
Fred Barnett with us here on the Sports Bash, one of the guys lucky enough to play for Buddy Ryan. And
yes.
Fred, Mike Gill and I were, you know, we do this. You do this over a bar stool or with a sud in your hand, or you do it on the radio in debate. Which defense, if you had to pick one, is the defense of all time? Is it the 1991 Eagles defense that was so dominant, or do you pick the 1985 Bears defense?
Oh, that's a good one. I have to pick the defense I played with. I have to pick the one that I played with.
We actually asked earlier, Fred, if that team was able to win a Super Bowl, would people look at that 91 Eagles defense on par, if not better, than the 85 Bears? Because the Bears were able to win the Super Bowl, they get the accolades.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. You know, one thing that I've apologized for over and over again, and of course, I'm one man doesn't make a team, but I feel like if we have been a tad bit better on offense, we'd be wearing a ring right now. You know, with the defense that he put together and the scheme that he had, you know, and the defensive minds that he had on staff, but rather that he had, you know, I think they gave up like 13 points a game, which was, you know, it was ridiculous that we didn't win the Super Bowl, and you know, offensively, we just sputtered, and I think it was very unfortunate for him because Buddy should have had a second Super Bowl for sure.
Fred Barnett's with us, and Fred, you know, what was it like inside that locker room? Because it's been long rumored that it was a little wild and crazy at times, but Buddy didn't care as long as you showed up on Sunday.
Let me tell you this: I'm just glad we didn't have social media in the 90s, because I'm gonna tell you something. ESPN, you would have had hour-long sessions about the Philadelphia Eagles. There's some things I can't talk about. I refuse to talk about. You know, with all the characters that were on the team, and Buddy was really just kind of right in the mix. You know, with who he was as a head coach, and there were times I would kind of look at him and like, wow, I can't believe that he's tolerating some of the stuff that guys are saying and doing. But at the same time, too, guys were going out and producing, and it was interesting because you know it's really about It was actually really about production, and I say that because I compare it to, you know, what happened to the Philadelphia Eagles last year when guys who were producing were let go. So I mean, Buddy won't let a guy go, no matter who he is, if he's producing. If he's on the shelf, if he's a product on the shelf and he's selling, he's going to stay on the shelf.
And yet the most famous guy he let go, Chris Carter, credits him with saving his life.
Well, of course, and that's very interesting because, I mean, when we came in, you know, he sat and had a talk with me, and the wide receiver coach sat and had a talk with me, and he said, look, you know, some things are going to change, and we're going to put the ball in your court. And, of course, you know, I was up for the task, but at the same time, too, they let a guy go who's now a Hall of Famer, and Chris will tell you himself, you know, that was something that was needed to kind of wake him up. And I feel like if Chris would have stayed here, and I think he would feel the same way, Chris wouldn't have been Chris Carter, the Chris Carter he is today. So, and to a degree, and then Chris has said this before, Buddy did him a favor by waking him up.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, a very successful wide receiver. You know, he was, you know, put in the offense and put in a situation where he was very successful. He's a Hall of Famer. He's, you know, All-Pro a number of times, caught a ton of passes. And, you know, Buddy, he was doing what's best for the team. And that's a situation right there that's an example of where he was doing something or making a decision, not only for the organization, but for the player as well.
You came there, and he drafted you in that third round, Calvin Williams as well, and you said he threw you guys right into the fire. That team was coming off of an 11-5 year. What was the expectations and the training camp like for that 1990 season? Did Buddy feel like he was on the hot seat at all? I mean, it seems bizarre to think about like that he got fired the next year, but we know the problems with ownership and stuff. But was the inability to win a playoff game ultimately his demise there, or was it the rift with ownership? So what was that year like leading into it?
Well, that year, you have to understand, that year was my first year. So I'm coming in just kind of like naive about really what's going on, what went on the year before. I thought the New York Jets were going to draft me. I talked to people from the Jets right before the draft, and I was literally waiting for the Jets to call me, and all of a sudden Philadelphia calls me, and I'm like, what do you want? And they were like, we're getting ready to draft you. And I'm like, oh, it just kind of threw me off guard. So I'm like, I have no idea who's on this team. As a matter of fact, the Cowboys and the Jets were the two teams that talked to me the most. So I figured one of those teams would have drafted me. So once the Eagles drafted me, I all of a sudden, you know, I'm like, well, who's on the Eagles? Yeah, I know Randall Cunningham is there, but who? I didn't really know who was on the team. You know, I knew the stars like, you know, Keith Jackson, Keith Byers, you know, the Reggie Whites and what have you. But I really didn't know much. And of course, I didn't know the dynamics between ownership and of course the Buddy. So I just kind of fell into, you know, a hurricane there, a windstorm of what was going on. So I really can't speak about, you know, the dynamics of what went on. And of course, I was only there. Well, he was only there the 1 year, my first year, and he was gone. So I'm quite sure there are a lot of things that was happening. And this is an example as well of if we would have had social media, we probably would know. You know, would have known probably what was going on. But, you know, in hindsight, you know, I can't help to say, but what a great experience I had of playing with a guy who was playing for a guy, rather, a coach who was, you know, true to you as a player, true as a coach, and just wanted the best for you. And not only that, of course, he wanted the best for the team. And as I mentioned, he would look you in the eye. He looked me in the eye and said, look, you're going to play for us. And I believe that. And once I heard that, it put the responsibility on me. It put the ball in my court because he trusted in me. He believed in me. He drafted me. You know, so if a Buddy Ryan drafts you, you know, you're a decent player. So that gave me the confidence to go out and really, you know, be the player that I was.
The Buddy Ryan stamp of approval. We're talking with Fred Barnett here on the Sports Bash. Philadelphia Eagles, 1990 to 1995. Dolphins, 96-97. Pro Bowl in 92, and the Ed Block Courage Award winner for the Eagles in 1994. Freddie, it's been a little while since Mike Gill and I have been able to catch up with you. How are things with you on a personal level? What's going on in Fred Barnett's life?
Things are very well. I have, as a matter of fact, I'm going to stay. I need to stay in touch with you guys because in the next maybe month, I'm doing something here in Philadelphia, and I'm not going to even say it right now. I'm doing something here in Philadelphia. I put a group together. We've talked to city council. We've talked to the governor's people. That's very, very special for the city in terms of sports. So you need to stay tuned to it. So I would definitely be reaching out to you guys.
Very cool. And as we know, you are a guy. It's funny because we've talked about all the nicknames for games, the Fog Bowl, the Pork Chop Bowl, the Bounty Bowl, all these games. And was it Buddy that came up with Arkansas Fred? Was he a guy, or did he just call you 80?
It was Arkansas Fred. It was Buddy. It was Buddy. And the way that name came about, and I can remember being in training camp, and he was like, "Come on, Arkansas Fred." I'm like, "Why did he call me Arkansas Fred?" Of course I'm from Arkansas State. But I found out later, as a matter of fact, I talked with Jeff Fisher, and Jeff said, "Do you know how you came up with the name Arkansas Fred?" I'm like, "No." Well, there was a young guy, a player actually, a receiver that was from Louisiana. That his name was Fred also, and so every time they said Fred, and both of us were on their draft board. And every time they said his name, he's like, "Which Fred are you talking about?" And he's, and of course, he said Fred Barnett, or I can't remember the young man's name, the player's name. But he said, "I tell you what, let's call the Fred from Arkansas Fred. Let's call the Fred from Louisiana Fred." So of course he ended up drafting Arkansas Fred. So that's how I got Arkansas Fred.
I don't know that.
So Buddy.
So yeah,
Buddy named me Arkansas Fred.
Yeah, because he was famous. He would say, "Hey, 86." He would just call you
numbers.
by your number. Yeah. You'd be 86. So did he ever refer to you as 86, or was it always Arkansas Fred?
It was always Arkansas Fred. It was always Arkansas Fred, and it's so interesting. It's when I can remember maybe my third practice, and it's interesting because when I heard the news this morning, all of a sudden I started reminiscing about my interactions with him. I can remember my third practice. We were walking back to the locker room, and he just passed by me. He's like, "You're gonna be good," and that's all he said. And I was trying to make a conversation with him. He just walked off from me. And I'm like, "What's wrong with this guy?" And since then I'm like, this maybe I am gonna be good. Here's a guy who's who played who coached for a Super Bowl team, and there were a number of defensive players. Now, this really kind of put the nail in the coffin for me. There were a number of defensive players that came to me and said, "Look, Buddy told us to kind of watch out for you because you're probably going to get on the field pretty quick. So you're a little different than the other rookies here." So I didn't go through all the hazing stuff. Whenever they tied somebody to the goalpost, they called my name and the other, the defensive players like Seth Jones would be like, "No, don't mess with him. Don't mess with Fred. Don't mess with Fred." So next thing you know, here I am. I'm on the field, and like 3-4 games into my rookie season, and I've been a starter. I was a starter for 8 years after that.
God bless you. That's Fred Barnett talking about Buddy Ryan and talking about his time and interaction. So when's the last time, Fred, that you talked to Buddy Ryan?
It was a couple of years ago. Actually, he was here, and of course, I mean, he was getting along, not doing too well, but just kind of hanging in there, and that I could tell that things weren't going well, but as I mentioned, the one interesting thing about it is that I feel like to some degree I was kind of pulled in as an adoption, so to speak, because he was such a defensive-minded coach. I walk in the room and he's like, "Hey, Arkansas Fred," but Seth walk in the room, he's like, "Hey, Seth, let's talk." He was such a defensive. He was just a defensive guy. And
were there any other offensive guys in that club?
Not that I know of, and maybe he knew him, but not that I know of. But there's a guy. Let me tell you an interesting story about what Buddy did one time, and this is the kind of coach he was. There's a young man, and I cannot remember the guy's name. When we played, he came in. He borrowed his. If I'm not mistaken, I think he borrowed his brother-in-law's UPS uniform.
Okay.
This is a true story. He borrowed his brother-in-law's UPS uniform, and he walked into our offices, to the executive offices, with an empty box, pretending he had a to deliver a package.
All right.
And he was walking around looking for Buddy Ryan's office, Coach Ryan's office. He found him. He went into the office, sat down, and said, "Look." He explained himself. He said, "Look, this is my brother-in-law's uniform. There's nothing in this box. You don't have anything to worry about. Just give me a chance to play football, please."
Oh, wow.
And he was on the team for, I think, 3 years.
Unbelievable.
And any other coach would have said, "Get this maniac out of here."
Right, security, yeah.
But the nerve that he had, Buddy said, "All right, I'll give you a chance." Next thing you know, this guy's playing 3 years in the league.
Wow.
He just walked in. And here's a guy, and I can remember this guy just being 100%, 100 miles per hour in practice, and we knew where that came from, because here's a guy who said, "You know what? I have a dream to play in this league," and you know what? He played. Any other coach would have kicked him out of his office so quick.
What was the name of the guy he said, "How can I cut a guy" name? What was it, like Cap Boso or something? He said, "How do I cut a guy like that?" Right? A very colorful guy.
I don't remember that one.
He had a lot of good quotes.
From a negative standpoint, I do remember him coming over to their offensive field, and there was a young man. I can't remember. I do remember where he was from, but I can't remember his name. He was from Wyoming, and we ran the same play 3 times in a row, and he screwed it up 3 times in a row, and Buddy said, "Cut him right now," and he walked off. And I looked, and I said, "Is he serious?" And Joe Willie.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you remember that name.
Oh yeah, I do.
Joe Willie. The next practice, he was gone, and I was like, "God, he just cut him right on the. He cut him right on the field." I mean, if you weren't ready to play pro football, there was no sense in you being on Buddy's team, period.
Well,
that's who he was.
He was honest.
He was looking for the cream. He was honest. He was an honest guy, man. And that was the realness about him. That was the it was the cream about him. And what a legend. A cornerstone really in my life to have him draft me and have him look me in the eye and say, "Hey, we're going to depend on you. We need you." And for Buddy Ryan to look me in my eye and say, he needs me, I'm floored by that, and I'm honored. And this is a really sad time for myself and a lot of other players.
Fred Barnett, Arkansas Fred, as he was called by Buddy Ryan, and then, of course, by Eagles fans all over. Played for Buddy 1990 season, and he was kind enough to join us to share some stories here, Fred. We always appreciate catching up with you, and get back in touch with us when you got something going on up there, as you mentioned.
Oh, I will. Appreciate it, guys.